A king who didn't want to be king. It sounds strange, but Louis XVI did not dream of power from childhood. He did not dream of conquest, did not want to command armies, did not seek to rule the fate of nations. He was much more interested in fiddling with locks and keys, to study mechanics and design mechanisms. If things had gone differently, he could have become a talented craftsman or even an inventor. But fate had it differently. His older brother died, and Louis had to take the place of the heir to the throne. From the start, he was out of place. The throne needed a decisive, clever, and cunning ruler, and he was soft, slow, and indecisive. This wasn't a big deal as long as the country lived in relative order. But times changed, the people grew poorer, the economy collapsed, and Louis remained the same. A man who was more fond of mastering keys than running the state. At the age of 15, he was married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. For France, it was an important political union, but for the people it was another cause for hatred. The wedding cost so much money that the money could have been used to feed tens of thousands of starving French people. The common people looked at this feast during the plague and began to hate not only the queen, but also the king himself, who did nothing to change the situation. The king didn't need to go to war or commit crimes for people to hate him. Inaction was enough. When France was in deep crisis and the people began to starve, Louis XVI did nothing to stop it. He wasn't a cruel tyrant, but he wasn't a good ruler either. He just lived in his own world, not realizing what was going on outside the palace walls. One of the most famous stories of the time is about the phrase, "let them eat cake." Allegedly, when Marie Antoinette was told that ordinary people do not even have bread, she indifferently replied that they can eat sweets. Historians still argue whether she actually said this, but the fact remains that the people believed that their queen was completely detached from reality. But that wasn't the worst of it. When France's treasury was empty, Louis decided that new taxes had to be imposed. But he did it so stupidly that the situation only got worse. It wasn't the aristocrats or the rich landowners who had to pay, but the poorest, the peasants and workers. People who were already barely making ends meet now had to give even more money to the king, who continued to organize lavish balls and spend huge sums on palace life. It would seem that even after this, something could be done about it. You could at least speak to the people, try to explain yourself, to show that the king cares. But Louis XVI did not do even that. He locked himself up in his chambers and waited for things to work themselves out somehow. And just like that, the last chance was lost. People were first outraged, then angry, and then they started demanding blood. The French Revolution began not because someone wanted to overthrow the monarchy, but because it was impossible to tolerate it any longer. The king could still save himself. When it became clear that the revolution was gaining strength and his power was crumbling, Louis XVI decided to flee. The plan was simple. Get out of Paris, get to the border, and take refuge in Austria, where his allies were waiting for him. If he had made it in time, French history could have taken a very different course. But it all went wrong. For one thing, Louis procrastinated too long. He couldn't make up his mind to escape because he hoped things would somehow work themselves out. While he hesitated, the situation in the country was getting worse, and when he did make up his mind, it was too late. Secondly, the escape itself was poorly organized. Instead of using light carriages and traveling stealthily, the king insisted on a large, luxurious carriage. He didn't want to give up his comfort. He also took with him a huge chest of silver, which slowed down the traveling. It was this that played a decisive role. The family wasted time, made unnecessary stops, and the revolutionaries had time to raise the alarm. But the most absurd moment is how Louis XVI was recognized. In one of the small towns, their carriage was stopped by an ordinary postmaster. He happened to look at the king and realized that his face seemed familiar. Why? It was simple. His profile was depicted on the coins. This man was not a spy, was not a conspirator, but he immediately realized that in front of him, the King of France. He immediately summoned soldiers and the fugitives were apprehended. This mistake cost Louis everything. Instead of being safe, he was a prisoner. Instead of a second chance at life, he signed his own death warrant. Louis XVI did not believe until the last moment that he could be executed. He was sure that he would simply be exiled or imprisoned. After all, he's a king, and kings don't get killed, do they? But the French Revolution left him no chance. The trial was a show trial. Louis was accused of treason, conspiring against the people and trying to escape. Technically, it was a trial, but in reality, the verdict was a foregone conclusion. However, the vote in the National Assembly passed by a minimal margin. 361 deputies voted in favor of the death penalty, while 360 were against. The difference was just one vote. One man could have saved the king, but it didn't happen. After the verdict, Louis had one more day to live. He bade farewell to his family and asked permission to see a priest. As he was led to the guillotine, he held himself with dignity, without panic. He even tried to address the crowd to say his last words. But the revolutionaries had prepared in advance. The drummers began to beat their drums loudly, drowning out his voice, and no one heard him. On the morning of January 21st, 1793, the guillotine came down. A moment later, the king's head was raised by the executioner in front of the crowd. The people first froze and then began to shout with joy. For them, it was the end of the old world and the beginning of a new era. But the king's death did not bring peace to France. The country plunged into chaos, thousands of people were executed, and the revolution began to devour its own leaders. And the main paradox is that Louis XVI, who was considered weak, on his last day showed more dignity than those who judged him. After Louis XVI's execution, no one gave him a grand funeral. His body was quickly dumped in a mass grave in the Madeleine cemetery and covered with quicklime so that it would decompose sooner. This was done on purpose. The revolutionaries feared that the monarchists might try to steal the king's remains and make them a symbol of resistance. That seemed to be the end of the story. But the most interesting thing began later. According to the old royal tradition, after the death of French monarchs, their hearts were removed and stored separately. This was the case with Louis XVI. Although he was executed as a common criminal, one of the court doctors secretly cut out his heart and hid it. For years, no one knew where it was. Decades later, suddenly the heart was in the possession of Spanish monks. How it got there is a mystery. Perhaps it was transported by secret supporters of the monarchy. Then the relic changed owners. It was bought by a French historian who kept the king's heart in a glass jar. It sounds like the plot of a mystical novel, but it is reality. For a long time, no one could confirm that this organ really belongs to Louis XVI. But in 2010, scientists analyzed the DNA and proved that this is indeed the heart of the executed king. After that, he was finally buried in the Bourbon tomb, among other French monarchs. The story of Louis XVI is a reminder of how easily power loses touch with the people and how it can end. And who knows how many other rulers in the future will repeat his mistakes. What do you think about it? Write in the comments.